often said that history is written by the victors. We accept that as a cliche, almost a throwaway line. But what if the problem isn't just who writes the history, but the mechanism of the storytelling itself? What if the foundational narratives we use to build nations, justify borders, and wage wars are actually, fabricated?
That is the precise, uncomfortable question at the heart of the book we are discussing today.
Exactly. Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into a 2024 release that is, to put it mildly, provocative. The book is titled Half the Story Has Never Been Told, Why We Lie. The author is Andrew Brel.
And Jake, right off the bat, we need to make a really important distinction for our listeners. If you type that title into a search engine, you might get a very famous history book by Edward Baptist called The Half Has Never Been Told, which is about slavery and American capitalism. That is not the book we are talking about today.
Right. Similar title, completely different universe. Andrew Brel's book is, how would you even categorize it? It's part history, part political polemic, part philosophical treatise on the nature of deception.
I think polemic is the right word. Brel himself describes it as a book of facts and opinions. It is a sweeping, aggressive look at how religious myths, specifically biblical lore, have been weaponized over the last 6,000 years to justify modern geopolitical violence. And he focuses very specifically and controversially on the history of Zionism.
It's heavy stuff. And to understand why a guy like Andrew Brel is writing this, you have to look at his resume, because he isn't a tenured professor of Middle Eastern studies. He's a musician. He's a producer. He wrote a thriller called One Day in Paris.
He is an incredibly eclectic figure. He was born in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1960 to Greek parents. And that South African context is absolutely critical to understanding his worldview. He grew up under apartheid in a society that was literally structured around a massive, state-enforced lie about racial superiority.
And he didn't just grow up in it, he was conscripted into it.
Correct. In 1979, he was drafted into the South African Defense Force, the SADF, during the Border War. This was a conflict that the apartheid government framed as a holy crusade against communism and the Black Peril. Brel was there, on the ground, and he hated it. He later wrote a memoir about this called The Emergency Bouzouki Player.
The title alone tells you something about his survival strategy.
Exactly. He essentially used his skills as a musician, playing the guitar and the bouzouki, to navigate the absurdity of military life. But that experience cemented a deep, lifelong distrust of authority, and specifically of the racist religious right, which is a phrase he uses constantly in his work. He sees a direct line between the religious indoctrination he saw in apartheid South Africa and the conflicts he analyzes in Half the Story Has Never Been Told.
So let's pivot to the new book. The title, Half the Story Has Never Been Told. That's a Bob Marley lyric, isn't it?
It is. It's from Get Up, Stand Up. The line is, half the story has never been told, so now you see the light, stand up for your rights. It fits Brel perfectly. He's a musician using a musical reference to signal that the official version of history is a manipulation.
So what is the half of the story that he thinks we're missing? Because the book covers a massive time span, biblical lore to the present day.
The core argument Brel makes is that we have allowed ancient religious texts, stories that he argues are essentially mythology, to be treated as land deeds and historical fact.
He traces this lie from biblical times all the way to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and the ongoing conflict today.
This is where it gets controversial, because for millions of people, those aren't myths. They are sacred history. Brel seems to be taking a very hardline atheist stance here.
He is unapologetically atheist and anti-clerical. He views organized religion, particularly what he calls the Christian Zionist Alliance, as a force for genocide and oppression. He argues that by accepting these lies, that God promised a specific piece of real estate to a specific group of people thousands of years ago, we justify human rights abuses in the present. It's interesting because usually when we talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we get bogged down in the immediate details, the 1967 borders, the Oslo Accords, the settlements. Brel seems to be zooming out to a philosophical level, asking, why do we even accept the premise of the argument?
Right, he's attacking the epistemological root of the conflict. He's asking, why does the world accept a divine right argument in the 21st century? And his answer, reflected in the subtitle, Why We Lie, is that these narratives serve power. They allow colonial projects to cloak themselves in righteousness.
Does he get into the specifics of the history, though, or is it mostly this high-level critique?
He does get into specifics, but filtered through that polemical lens. He looks at the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, and the wars of 1948 and 1967. But he's not just recounting dates. He's reframing them as moments where the lie was codified into international law. For example, he spends time discussing the influence of Christian Zionism in the UK and US, how politicians who might not even be Jewish are driven by their own biblical interpretations to support specific policies in the Middle East.
That's a crucial point. You can't understand U.S. foreign policy without understanding that specific brand of evangelical Christianity. It aligns with Brel's broader critique in his other book, The Three R's, which stands for the racist religious right.
Yes, The Three R's is a collection of short stories, but it hits the exact same target. Brel sees this axis of conservatism and religious fundamentalism as the primary threat to human progress. Whether it's in the US, South Africa, or Israel, he sees the same pattern: dogmatic belief used to crush nuance and humanity.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here, Rachel. Brel is a musician and a storyteller. He's clearly passionate. But is this rigorous history? If I'm a listener who wants to understand the Middle East, is this the book I pick up?
That is the million-dollar question. If you are looking for a neutral, academic, peer-reviewed study of the region, no, this is not that book. This is a polemic. It is facts and opinions, as he says. It's meant to shake you. It's meant to make you angry.
It sounds like it has the energy of a pamphlet from the 1700s, like Thomas Paine. It's designed to mobilize.
That's a great comparison. Brel isn't trying to get tenure. He's trying to dismantle a worldview. And because he's self-published and operates outside the mainstream publishing houses, he can say things that are incredibly blunt. He uses words like genocide and apartheid freely, drawing on his own experience with the actual apartheid regime in South Africa to make comparisons that many mainstream historians might shy away from.
That South African connection is fascinating. When someone who actually carried a rifle for the apartheid state says, "I recognize this system," it carries a different kind of weight than a campus activist saying it.
It absolutely does. In The Emergency Bouzouki Player, he describes the cognitive dissonance of being a young Greek boy in South Africa forced to fight for a white supremacist government he didn't believe in. He talks about the absurdity of the propaganda, how they were told they were fighting for civilization against savagery. He sees the exact same rhetoric being used today in the Middle East. For Brel, it's not a theoretical parallel, it's a lived reality.
We should also touch on his style. You mentioned he narrates the audiobook himself. That seems significant.
It is. The audiobook runs something like 21 hours. It's massive, and hearing him read it adds a layer of personal intensity. You're not getting a detached narrator. You're getting the author's own frustration and urgency. It feels less like a lecture and more like a very long, very intense conversation with a guy who has seen too much of the world's hypocrisy.
It's also worth noting that Brel doesn't just write about geopolitics. He has a book called Who Lies Wins, which is about the family court system. It seems like his obsession is the system is rigged, whether it's the UN, the church, or the divorce court.
You've hit the nail on the head. The through line in all his work, from The Emergency Bouzouki Player to Who Lies Wins to Half the Story Has Never Been Told, is the idea that institutions lie to protect themselves. In Who Lies Wins, he details his own harrowing experience with a custody battle, arguing that the legal system incentivizes conflict and dishonesty. He applies that same skepticism to the history of Zionism. He believes the official story is always a cover-up for someone's profit or power.
Which brings us back to the subtitle, Why We Lie. It's almost a psychological diagnosis of the human species.
It is, and the we is important. He's not just blaming leaders, he's implicating all of us who accept the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. We prefer the myth of the chosen people or the righteous war because the alternative, that history is just a series of brutal land grabs, is too bleak to face.
It reminds me of that quote, often attributed to Mark Twain, that it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled.
Precisely, and Brel is trying to do the hard work of convincing people they've been fooled. That's why the book is so long and why it goes back 6,000 years. He feels he has to deconstruct the entire edifice, brick by brick.
Let's talk about the reception. A book like this, especially released in 2024, given the current news cycle, must be polarizing.
Extremely. If you look at the reader reviews, they tend to be either 5 stars or 1 star. People either see him as a brave truth teller finally saying what needed to be said, or they see him as biased, anti-Semitic, or historically reckless. But that polarization is exactly what a polemic is designed to provoke. It forces you to pick a side.
And I suppose for Brel, silence or neutrality is the worst possible reaction. He'd rather you hate the book than ignore the issue.
100%. Remember, this is a man who left South Africa because he couldn't stomach the silence of complicity. He moved to the UK, then to California. He's a global citizen who refuses to be quiet. He's using his platform and his remaining years to scream fire in the theater.
So, Rachel, if we step back, what is the legacy of a book like this? It's not going to replace textbooks, it might not change policy, so what does it do?
It serves as a counter-narrative. In an era of information warfare where every side is trying to control the story, books like Half the Story Has Never Been Told act as a wedge. They pry open a space for doubt. Even if you don't agree with Brel's conclusions, simply engaging with his premise that our foundational myths might be lies changes how you watch the news tonight. It makes you a more skeptical, more critical observer.
And maybe that's the point. It's not about giving you a new set of facts to memorize. It's about teaching you to ask, who is telling this story and what are they leaving out?
Exactly, because as the title says, usually half the story has never been told.
Andrew Brel's Half the Story Has Never Been Told, Why We Lie. It's a challenging, difficult, and undeniably necessary conversation starter. Rachel, thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Jake.
And thank you for listening. Keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.